Hey everyone, today we are starting our discussion of observing and recording behavior, so chapter 2 in your textbook. First off, we are talking about behavioral assessment. Oh, before we get into it, I wanted to mention this image from your text because everything about it makes me sad. I don't know if it's the pale blue of everything, the sort of uniformity of it, the disinterested gaze of the supervisor as he tallies the tardiness of his employees, and the dejected gaze of this worker who is once again late and will probably be reprimanded for it. I find it to be a very strangely evocative and truly upsetting dystopian, but strangely relatable. Okay, so what's the purpose of behavioral assessment? First off, we need to decide if a problem exists. Is a treatment or change necessary? To go back to our dystopian nightmare image, perhaps the administration thinks there is a problem with tardiness, so baseline measurements are taken, and perhaps it turns out that not that many people are late or they're not very late, so a treatment or change might not be necessary. If it turns out lots of people are late all the time, then perhaps something does need to change. A good intervention should anticipate and account for reactivity. So reactivity is the idea that things will change with the mere introduction of a program, right? So you can imagine in the lateness example, if people are being observed and they are aware that how often they are late is being recorded, that in itself might produce a change, right? Like if you know you're being watched, you might be more responsible. So that's reactivity, right? You are changing your behavior in response to being assessed, right? And that is a separate effect from any sort of intervention. A good design will acquire assessment before and after treatment. So we need a baseline, and then we need to also record the behavior during a treatment period. So in the example, the tardiness example, we would need to assess how often people are late before any treatment is administered and then measure the change afterwards. So perhaps some sort of incentive program is introduced where you get a bonus if you aren't late for X number of shifts. You need to measure how often people are late before that and then after to see the effect that your treatment has produced. And to sort of circle back, that preliminary measurement can inform decisions regarding effective treatments. So what you measure during the baseline period might inform what a good intervention might be. So when it comes to assessing behavior, there's two broad categories of the way we can do that, or indirect and direct. And it's what it sounds like, right? Indirect means that we obtain information on the target behavior from the person exhibiting the behavior or others, but it relies on recall, right? We're not directly observing the behavior, we're relying on the recall of individuals. This can come through interviews, questionnaires, rating scales, product measures, basically just asking people what they remember about the target behavior. So going back to our tardiness example, you might interview someone and say, well, how often were you late last week? Or give them a questionnaire asking them how often they think people around them are late, right? Indirectly asking. Whereas direct is when a person or device records the target behavior as it occurs. So this is direct observation and recording as the target behavior happens. So this doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is sitting there watching, right? We could use a device to do it. For example, there might be a time clock in place where somebody has to punch into work every day. Or perhaps there's a video camera that records when people enter the premises. We are directly observing the behavior through a device in that instance. Or perhaps, as in the weird image we saw, there is just a guy standing there with a clipboard recording things as they happen. Regardless, we are directly observing the behavior and not relying on anyone's memory. So direct is preferred, right? It tends to be more accurate, and the observer is trained to notice and record, right? We can train someone on what they're looking for and how to record that data. Indirect is less desirable because it depends on memory. People may not notice or remember all occurrences of the target behavior. So when possible, direct is preferred, but sometimes direct isn't possible. Okay, that's it for this time. Next, we are on to recording behavior.